Sinaloa. Sinaloa. The word itself conjures fear and mystery. The headquarters of the world's most powerful drug cartel, the land of El Chapo, where demonstrators protested his arrest and celebrated his escapes, where buchonas, scantily clad women, wear "Give me a baby, Chapo" t-shirts and blur the lines between real life and music videos, where tigers and jaguars are pets, where gangsters' grave sites have air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and original art on the walls, where ordinary people spend the half hour after New Year's hiding under tables as automatic gunfire erupts across the capital, where more than 90% of homicides do not produce an arrest. So what can a gringo professor and some graduate students do in a place like this? How can we help to reduce violence and build sustainable peace? What can universities do more broadly in places that are beset by violence and shrouded in fear? What can you do, informed citizens? Quite a bit, I think. And the trick is to make yourself into an anchor, not a parachute. The first step in this process is to unpack the mythos of a place like Sinaloa. There's a popular narco corrido in Mexico right now called Por Ser de Sinaloa, just for being from Sinaloa. The singer bemoans the harassment he gets at the hands of the police and potential mothers-in-law and respectable people everywhere, even as he dresses and acts just like a drug trafficker. And it's not just a winking metaphor. Right now, the State Department gives Sinaloa its most severe advisory: do not travel, and marks it a glaring red on its alert map. It's true, violence has spiked recently. And in fact, Sinaloa is the epicenter of a decade-long wave of violence in Mexico that's cost more than 150,000 lives, more than 30,000 forced disappearances, and the assassination of hundreds of activists and journalists. It's real. And sometimes the work of peace building means that you have to go to places and engage with people in situations where conventional educators might not venture. But we're not like police or firefighters or Marines either, running into danger. And we shouldn't think of ourselves that way. That kind of ethos lends itself to the shortcuts we take in times of crisis. Right? During a fire, we're worried about how many lives we can save. We're not worried about the long-term effects of our actions or the root causes or whether or not we strengthen democracy. It's an exercise of power, no? We become like soldiers in a war, parachuting into danger. And when we parachute into places like Sinaloa, we do more harm than good. Examples of this abound. As proof of success in Sinaloa, the first U.S. drug czar cited the economic devastation of the countryside. That devastation actually increased the reputation of local drug cartels. Why? Because they were the only ones who came in afterwards and rebuilt devastated towns. Can we really blame people for supporting them? How are those people supposed to live? More recently, USAID has a program called the Culture of Lawfulness, where they promote a civic values curriculum. Most would agree that taking bribes or disrespecting the legal authorities are bad things, no doubt. But how can you ask the mother of a person kidnapped and disappeared by men in police uniforms or police vehicles to respect the police, to trust the police? They have to lead by example, and those same officers can't set a good example if their own families are threatened by organized crime and their government cannot protect them. In 2007, Mexican President Felipe Calderón talked about innocent victims of torture, murder, and disappearance as collateral damage of the drug war. People might accept collateral damage in a short-term conflict or crisis. But the present drug war in Mexico has raged on for more than a decade, and there's no end in sight. And it's not just high government officials or heavy-handed actions with soldiers, guns, and money. This top-down tendency of the parachutist has been replicated and internalized
and vocalized locally. So, for example, when we ask participants in our programs in Mexico, what's the most important cause of violence? The most popular answer is the, quote, ignorance of the people. And it's often accompanied by colorful local examples. So they cite a case known as El Pirata de Culiacán. El Pirata was a chubby teenage YouTube star who acted and partied like a drug trafficker and then got murdered for insulting a real drug trafficker just last December. El Pirata embodies a stereotype about a whole class of people in Sinaloa who would trade their daughters for a new pickup truck. And what solution do the offended propose? Education and courses in values are the most popular. If your plan is to parachute in from on high and lecture people with little regard for the long-term consequences or root causes, it doesn't matter if you're coming from Mexico City or Washington, D.C. or San Diego or the State House or the private school around the corner or up on the hill as it might be. We have to do better. So you might say to me, and lots of people say this to me all the time, and they say it very conversationally, right? You might say to me, yeah, but just legalize it. Legalize it, bro. I hear it all the time. Look, the criminalization of drugs is clearly responsible for a lot of the violence, and decriminalization could play a role in reducing it. But as a one-off solution, it's just another parachute. It's an abstraction dropped into a dangerous place from a safe distance. It's a nice end with no clear means. More important, decriminalization doesn't deal with the fact that much of the violence of the drug war in Mexico is actually political violence. Nor can it deal with the crushing reality of drug addiction in the United States, but increasingly in Mexico as well. Most important, decriminalization can't undo the harm already done. Dealing with this harm, with the human side of the drug war, isn't just a palliative. It's a precondition for any kind of meaningful social change. So how do you make yourself into an anchor rather than a parachute? How do you make yourself into a source of strength in turbulent times? Strength from afar that locals can leverage. Well, here at the Kroc School, our model is simple. We offer free or low-cost peace-building programs to people in affected areas, like Sinaloa, and we use them for two purposes. First, as incubators for local social innovations, and second, as a teaching lab for our own students. And there's no false idealism here either. And we're not just using other people's pain or distress as teachable material. We serve each other's interests. We offer ourselves as intellectual infrastructure, free from local political commitments and institutional constraints. And our local partners offer our students a seat at the table, the chance to apply their knowledge in the messy but beautiful world beyond the classroom. So you might ask me, well, what do we teach? How do you do it? Well, we specialize in preventing, mitigating, and dealing with the aftermath of armed conflict. So we begin with some basic lessons about armed conflict. Let me share 3 of those lessons with you. The first lesson is that most of the killing, even during war, is done by a small minority of people. From World War II to the genocides in Cambodia and Rwanda, whole populations mobilized to fight, but tiny minorities were responsible for most of the killing. The second lesson: most atrocities involve coercive participation, and most of the perpetrators are young people. And this holds true whether we're talking about Vietnam or Guatemala or Tamaulipas or Michoacan. The third lesson: most people become physically ill the first time they kill someone or the first time they witness a killing. And even those who seem to take sadistic pleasure in killing or being around killing retain the possibility to recognize and suffer morally for what they have done. And crucially, most of them have been victims of violence themselves. These basic facts about armed conflict remind us that we're facing a violence problem, not a Sinaloa problem or a Mexico problem. They also remind us that it's a shared problem and that we should and must share the burdens of this experience. Trauma and violence isolate by definition. They rupture survivors' self-narratives and leave them feeling like nobody could possibly understand their pain. But violence also creates stories that need to be told. And the universality of these stories means that veterans of Vietnam and Iraq and Afghanistan have something to say to veterans of Guerrero and Sinaloa and Michoacan. That solidarity is possible and, in fact, necessary. And if you want to make this connection, you have to engage with perpetrators. They're people, not zombies, after all. You know, the zombie craze in pop culture and The Walking Dead and all that, it's just as popular in Mexico as it is in the United States. In fact, The Walking Dead is shot in Mexico. And it offers a perfect inversion of the real violence we face in Mexico right now. In the middle of a conflict in which the line between victims and perpetrators is murky and morally complex, zombies imagine violence with no moral ambiguity, victims with no personality, and killing as a kind of sport where you get style points for creative methods. When we ditch the zombies and we deal with perpetrators as people, the results can be really surprising. Let me tell you a little story. One of the participants, a graduate student in one of our seminars in Culiacan, Sinaloa, related to us an encounter that he had with 3 sicarios, killers. He and 2 colleagues were scouting locations to build new schools when they blew a tire along a remote stretch of road in northern Sinaloa. He walked to a gas station to get a wrench, only to realize when he got back to the truck that he had the wrong size wrench. Just as the sun was starting to set, an SUV with 3 armed dudes rolled up behind them. 2 of the guys got out. Petrified, the graduate student explained to them what had happened, and they went and got the right-sized wrench out of their truck and helped them change the tire. Afterwards, the grad student sitting in the driver's side, and the boss of the armed band comes up to the window. He thinks to himself, I hope they just take the truck. Instead, the guy offers his hand, and he leaves them with a kind of request. He says, listen, morros, listen, guys, bring some schools up here to the rancho. I know that we're screwed, but I want the kids around here to learn a different way to make a living. They shook hands, and he left. This was an invitation to build bridges, not walls. And as peace builders, there are 3 core principles that guide building bridges. The first is recognition. We have to actively accompany, document, and recognize the experience of victims and survivors, but also of perpetrators and witnesses as people, as human beings, not as data points or problems. Second, we have to provide them with positive support. Sure, we want to teach them all kinds of high-order stuff about peace building, but we also have to teach people tangible skills, alternative ways of living. Things like, how do you make craft beer, start a craft beer movement? How do you do market research or survey? Something as simple as, how do you shoot a documentary film on your phone and share it? And we have to give them the space to design and prototype and implement their own ideas, not our ideas. The third principle is integration. Culiacan, like much of urban Latin America, is a city of walls and gates and security guards, of segregated and inaccessible public spaces. And beyond the physical barriers, institutional and social hierarchies channel people into silos and discourage collaboration. But it's also a place of tremendous resources. The best part about this work is that you discover the incredible civic activism and civic spirit below the headlines. Things like pioneering after-school programs, former graffiti artists who've totally revamped public spaces, caravans of ordinary citizens who've retaken and revitalized the beach at Altata, and now the plaza at Villa Juarez, places that have been totally overrun by drugs and blight, marketing professionals who donate their time doing media campaigns for peace. We need to build bridges with these people. And we need to tear down the walls that separate the resources that they represent from the people who need them the most. Building bridges and tearing down walls isn't just a nice metaphor for the US-Mexico border either. You might ask me, why aren't we doing this in New Orleans or Baltimore or Chicago? Let's think about Chicago for a second. In 2013, the Chicago Crime Commission named El Chapo Guzman, the same dude from Sinaloa, public enemy number 1, a designation it hadn't used since Al Capone in 1929. And like Sinaloa, Chicago has a problem with violence, but it also has a disproportionately bad reputation. Chicago actually is not in the top 5 homicide rates in the United States right now. More important, the best activists in Chicago know the lessons of war. They know that most of the perpetrators are young people seeking a justice that they can't get from the authorities. They're not zombies. And they know that they're redeemable with recognition, with positive support, and with integration. How cool would it be to link them with activists from Sinaloa? Why can't universities be that bridge? We have the intellectual capital. We have the social networks to anchor this kind of effort, including you fine people. And we need to train our students to apply their knowledge in the real world. You want to be a peace builder? You want to make a difference in a place like Sinaloa? Seek out those common threads, those stories that need to be told, those interests waiting to be addressed. Make yourself an anchor, a resource, and leave your parachute behind.